to the season finale of the Court O Coaching Chronicles. I'm Alex, joined once again by Nathan. Nathan, we made it, baby. How's it going?
Yeah, episode 4.
Yeah.
We made it through call time.
Yeah, made it through call time. So today's episode is kind of a celebration of what we've been doing, a culmination of the coaching we've had for call time. We're this is the end of season 1. We're excited to have a season 2 coming up with Strixhaven, but we thought we'd put kind of a bow on this season. So today we're not going through any gameplay, we're not going through any videos, but instead Nathan actually did some analysis of 17lands.com data. We're gonna look at that, looking at where he was drafting cards or where he was valuing cards compared to how good the cards actually were. I think Nathan has some great takeaways both for himself and some things that I think the viewer at home can apply. And then we're just gonna have a big wrap up, what Nathan's learned, some examples of where he was before and where he is now, some very poignant decks that he's put aside that really I think show just how far that he's come in these few weeks, which I couldn't be prouder, of course, as the coach here. Hey everybody, just before we jump into the action, I just wanted to give a quick thank you to everybody out there who tuned into the first season here of the Court O Coaching Chronicles. We had a blast doing it, and we got a lot of really good feedback, so thank you so much for watching. But also, just as an update to the GoFundMe page, we reached our goal, which is awesome. Like, we reached and surpassed it. So thank you so much to everybody who contributed to that. Really thankful. And the donation incentives that I mentioned last episode, those are going to carry on until April 20th. So if you would like to still contribute, still plenty of room to contribute if you would like to. We're not stopping it until April 20th. If you would like to contribute up until that point, you can. And once again, the top 2 donors will get an hour each of free coaching, either for themselves or to gift to somebody else. That's all I wanted to say. Once again, thank you so much. Really appreciate your viewership and your contribution. Let's jump into the action. All right, let's just move on. Let's get into our 17lands.com analysis. First of all, actually, I want to say, for anybody who's not familiar with 17lands.com, I imagine a lot of you out there watching this are. But if you're not, 17lands.com is a tracking site for your drafts. So basically, what you can do is you sign up for the website. I'll put the links in the description, and they track all your drafts. They track your draft picks. They track your draft games, so you can go back and watch. They track, everybody who signs up. They track all of their stats. So what that means is they just have, a ton of arena data. They've really, I think, really revolutionized the way that us limited players play, because we can really see a little bit deeper into the truth of what a format is really like and what's winning and what's not. So so I'd really recommend that if you're not. I think that's just a very easy way to level up your own game. And what Nathan's got for us here today is he's actually looked at some cards that he was taking highly, compared that to some 17 lands data, and kind of made some conclusions from there. Nathan, take it away. What have you got for us, and I guess what have you found?
Sure. So one of the things like you just touched on is really spending time doing analysis versus just doing gameplay. Mm-hmm. I learn just as much away from the game and playing and doing this kind of analysis or reflecting on plays as I do actually playing.
Me too. Yeah.
So for me, I'm a data junkie. Like what we'll pull up is a red-white deck here that I thought was a good aggro deck, but ultimately went 1-3. And honestly, the losses didn't feel due to variance. They felt like the deck was underpowered, or my cards weren't quite as good as my opponents, or, I don't know that I can directly attribute them to gameplay. I mean, I always can, as we've reflected in before, but my takeaway was there's something wrong with this deck. And so I wanted to really look at this and get an understanding of like where it was falling short. Mm-hmm. So what you can see here is that, I thought this had a good number of 2-drops. There's only 1-drop. I thought that the boast creatures in the 3-drop slot were good. And then, very low curve. We only have 3-4 drops. So right. Honestly, I thought this was a good tight. We even had like a rune synergy with the gold vein picks. But like I said, it really wasn't performing well. So what I did is I jumped over to 17 lands. And so this first table I want to present for you guys to see is what I found most enlightening for me is there's a column that basically says, what's the win improvement when drawn? And that means what does the card increase your win percentage or decrease your win percentage when it's in your deck and you drew it? Mm-hmm. I think that's a tremendous metric to see. And basically, if it has a negative value here, you actually lose win percentage when you draw that card, if it's ever in your hand or you ever drew it, if it's in your deck. And so I really recommend that people go and look at that. You might get some enlightening data from that. For me, this is just, an arbitrary amount of like the top 10 or 15 here. I think it's like 15. But what I really want to focus on is the next graphic. And what you see here is I went through, and in 17 lands, it'll show you how many of each card you've drafted. So I cross-referenced these two to say, what were the worst cards and how many of them did I draft? And what you see here highlighted in yellow are the cards that I drafted the most that actually made the deck.
Right.
Sometimes you end up with a lot of junk cards towards the end of the draft, like 8 smashing successes here never made the deck. But I know these cards in yellow I was playing.
Right.
And that means these were negative EV cards or negative win rate cards that I was playing frequently. And what do you see on there? Well, you see a lot of the cards here that were in that previous deck.
Totally.
You have Gold Mall Champion, Axgar Batter Shield Warrior in there. They all have negative 3 to 4% on your win percentage when you draw it. Further down the list, you're going to see Gold Mall Champion, same thing. So my takeaway from this was, maybe this is not what red-white aggro needs to look like in this format if these cards are making you losing or are decreasing your chances of winning the game. And so I did that analysis and I did this a couple of weeks back. And I wanted to know, like, how do I improve my aggro decks? And what you'll see on the screen here is an example of ultimately what ended up being a good aggro deck. And I shared this with Alex before the deck, we recorded, and Alex's takeaway was like, "Oh yeah, I thought this was going to be intuitive. This is what I think a good red-white deck looks like." And I think that your intuition just comes from a lot of play, Alex, and for those of us who can't put in whatever it is, 300 something events, we have to cherry pick ways to accelerate.
Totally.
And so this is a deck that went 6-3. The game, all the games felt great. Do I think this is like the pinnacle example of a red-white aggro deck in this format? No, but this was playing a lot more competitive cards. It was a lot more competitive games, clearly. Another example you can see is the same thing, but for green-white. And you're going to see a very similar theme here. A lot more Battlefield Raptors, a lot better cards in the 2-drop slot. Very few of those Boast cards. And then playing cards that actually, a lot of these cards, when you look them up, definitely like Struggle for Skimfar or Maya or Shepherd of the Cosmos, have a positive win percentage increase when you draw them and they're in your deck.
Right.
And this deck went 7-1. So I think for everybody out there, I wanted to highlight, this is an analysis that I'm probably going to do in the format moving forward, looking at what are the negative win percentage cards and trying to steer clear of them.
Yeah, and like you said, I looked at these two decks and I was like, oh yeah, these decks look great. Intuitively, to me, they look great. But if you really dig into, I think a lot of the stuff that I've been saying in these sessions, they have a lot of, you've kind of implemented a lot of things. They're, white aggressive decks that are based in evasions. You got the equipment in there. And I think also, you can tell me if this is true, but I'm sure that you're getting into these decks for the right reasons now. Not, oh, look, this, I'm getting this reasonable 2-drop 8th pick, right? But maybe that reasonable 2-drop, like an Irmersturm Raider, isn't actually that reasonable, right?
Yes.
So I think you're actually finding that lane because you know what the good cards for these decks are now, and it's much easier to end up there and steer into those decks too.
Yep, exactly. I think for me, the signpost card for getting into a bad deck originally was Gold Maw Champion. Because tapping down a blocker was always so good before. Like, what was the dinosaur that did that?
Oh, Territorial Hammer Skull. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't have to pay mana for it.
Which is huge.
I think the Boast is a huge drawback on a lot of the cards.
Yeah, and just to quickly go back to this this list here, this chart, it's really interesting because even for myself, there's a lot of cards on this list that did take me a little while to kind of come around on, oh, this isn't actually what I want in my aggressive decks in this format. And that's part of getting better too. The iterative process, right? Just going, really doing an analysis of after your games are done, even when you've won, go, what worked here, what didn't, right? And it took me, I mentioned this on one of the previous episodes, but it took me a long time to realize, Axe Guard Cavalry isn't that good in my red white aggro decks because it doesn't haste out a lot of things, right? It doesn't haste out a lot of large things. But even recently, the one that I've come down on, even in the past like 2 weeks, and we're really deep in the format, is Tuscary Firewalker, right? And I was in love with this card before. I was like, oh man, like, opponents are foretelling. This thing just gets in, draws a bunch of cards. These opponents, these snow opponents, are just taking forever to set up their mana. They're casting Glittering Frost on turn 3. This Firewalker gets in damage and it draws me cards. But these days, people are playing sleeker decks. They're getting on board earlier. They kind of know how to build the decks properly. And what happens with Tuscary Firewalker, I find, is that you don't really have that much of an opportunity to activate the boast ability as much as you'd like to. And I think for some players even, they're kind of tempted into activating it when they should just play their 4-drop or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a card that, has lost a lot of value to me, and I wouldn't have been prompted to really reevaluate that card if I hadn't looked at the data as early as I did. A lot of these are more intuitive. Emberstorm Raider isn't, the body's not very good and the effect is medium, right? Axar Bragger, it's like a 4-drop in my aggro deck. But even somebody, with a more trained eye, somebody who gets in those reps, like you said, like I even was fooled by the cards that I thought would be good, but turns out are really worth a second look. And I think that's super important looking forward. Because another thing too is a lot of times when I'm interacting either with somebody I'm coaching or in Twitch chat, you'll get a lot of people saying, oh, isn't this card just very good? Or isn't this card just very bad? And it's good. I think that's a great interaction to have, asking somebody, hold on a second, you're saying this one thing about this card. Maybe it's a card that I was talking up, or a card I was thinking about taking highly. And if you notice that somebody else might have an opinion that's different from yours, or something that tips you off to being like, oh, that person clearly has a different opinion on this card than I do. That's a great, that's a great trigger for you to go, let's look at the data, let's really get to the bottom of this card, and maybe the time I played it and it was bad, it was just in the wrong spot, or the time I played it and it was good, I just got a little bit lucky. So I really do think this kind of analysis is really, really great, and I'm super glad that this is what you did, and I'm looking forward to doing more of this in the future for myself and for us too.
Yeah. Two other things that I wanted to throw out there, just as things that came up as I looked through the data. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of the cards have a over 50% win rate when main decked, and I really struggled with what does that mean?
Right.
Like, how could that possibly be true? And I think the answer is the players that have 17 lands installed are on average better players and care more about their data. Therefore, their win percentage will be higher. Totally.
Yep. That's 100% it. So you do have a bit of skewing there. So that's something worth considering.
The second thing I did is you can actually download the raw data from 17 lands and exclude games that people mulliganed.
Oh, okay,
exclude games that were outside of Diamond, Mythic, or Platinum. So you're excluding dropping all of the bronze games.
Right.
And what I found was that the data presented on the regular analysis tab on 17 lands is very close. What ends up happening is the spread actually goes wider, in that the cards that look like they're doing well are actually doing even better in the upper brackets, and the cards that look like they're doing worse are actually doing worse.
Wow.
I didn't see any examples where a card got better when you got to Mythic. It was, if this Gold Maw champion is showing negative 3.2% to your win rate when drawn here, when you exclude it and go down to just that smaller subset, I think it went to like negative 3.6 or something like that. It got worse.
Wow. Yeah, that's so super interesting. And to speak to that quickly, 17 Lands has so many customizable features when you're trying to look at certain sets of data. Like, you can even look at stuff like, in the last week, how well did this card do? And now it's going to be a smaller sample size, so there's a bit of an issue there. But I've been looking at, how good is, let's say, let's go back to the Tuscary Firewalker. How good was that card at the beginning of the format? How good is it now in the past 3 weeks, right? You could even look at stuff like that if you really wanted to get into the nitty gritty of it. All right, and just to look at a few more of Nathan's decks that he's brought to the table here to kind of, illustrate some points, illustrate some things that he's learned. We've got this Snowy Control deck, which for anybody who watched episode 1, this was actually the first deck that we looked at, the first deck that we went through the draft gameplay and build of. Nathan, what did you want to say about this deck?
Wow, I mean, there's a lot that we said in that episode, but
Yeah.
The reason I'm bringing this full circle is when we started this format, these were some of the cards, not all of them, but some of the cards that I thought which indemnified or represented a snow deck, and looked like this was going to be like, oh, this is what a snow deck should somewhat look like in this format.
Right.
In retrospect, just to recap some of the mistakes from those 3 seasons, it's just a bad card. If you look at the 17 lands, it shows up like that. Frost Augur wasn't a great fit in this. This deck is very short of 2 drops. In the 3-drop slot, we have Glittering Frost and Replicating Ring, both of which you're not very keen on, and I think that's probably the right read. 2 Yetis, which aren't great. And then we have, Narfi. Like, the 5-drop slot there is actually okay.
Yeah, quality cards.
And not surprising, this deck went 0-3. So I wanted to bring this up just full circle to say, hey, this is where the format started for me. But where do we get to? And I actually have 2 control decks that I ended up drafting in this last couple days or last week or so that represent where I ended up on thinking a control deck should look like, or something that was more snowy should look like. First of all, I learned to be a good control snow deck, you don't have to have a lot of snow. You just need enough to trigger stuff. And this one actually doesn't have that much snow. The next example will be better for that. But I learned that Jespara Sentinel was quite good. I actually learned that from watching you and your channel. I think the 17 lands data shakes that out as well. This deck has a lot of action on the 1 and 2 slot. And then the 4 slot is quite strong in terms of all 4 of those cards, or specifically the Augury Raven and the 3 Elderleaf Mentors, were used to crew the Carve.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to stay high on land count. So if you look at it, Herald, Horizon, and all of the 4 drops can crew the Carve, which is great.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to gloss over the fact that the rares at the end are great, Chroma and Auron's Epiphany, but you don't draw them every time, and I actually only cast each one of those one time throughout the draft. Honestly, I won a lot more on the War Master, the 2-drop there, and then just valuing people out with Carve and Pillar. And so I just wanted to share, like, this is where the higher end, this is basically what my non-aggro decks morphed into.
Yeah, and I think a great thing to point out about this deck is exactly what you're alluding to here. Compared to that previous deck we looked at, obviously has the great top end, but the other deck had pretty good top end too. I think the real difference with this one is the fact that it has good early game, and you've just, maybe even unintuitively to some people out there, that your controlling decks want early creatures just as badly as your aggro decks do, right? They still need to be doing stuff. It's not like, oh, I'll just play my more powerful cards later in the game. You gotta be doing this. You gotta be doing stuff early in the game to get to the late game. And now that's very obvious for some people, I think. But I've come across more people than I would have thought that is a revelation to them. That it's like, oh, I still want a bunch of 2-drops and 1-drops if they're good. So yeah, that's a huge thing about this deck that previous deck didn't have. So I think that really illustrates here. And I think that exactly what you said, that's a great point. Your snow decks don't need that much snow to be snow decks. And that brings us to the next deck here, which is,
before we jump from this one, I just have two other things to share. One is, this deck actually has 13 elves in it, which was tremendous for the War Master.
Yes.
People keep passing that card. I don't get it. That card's great.
Yeah.
And then this is one of the first decks that I had played Disdainful Stroke in, and it was super clutch. I was actually really impressed with it in this format. What's your take on Disdainful Stroke?
Yeah, so number one, 100% agree. I think War Master, Elvish War Master is, I think, one of my most drafted rares just because people pass it to me. I don't know why. Like you said, it's odd. It's a very, very good card. Maybe people have heard Elves is bad and they don't want to draft the deck. We both very much know that's not true. So, we'll reap those rewards. But on Disdainful Stroke, I find that I like it specifically in this kind of deck, actually. Where, you're expecting the game to go pretty long. You want to get to your coma. You want to get to your more powerful cards to just win the game eventually. And longer the game goes, the more you expect to see the busted cards of the format, the Asika's Chariots, the Turgrid's Lanterns, you name it, any top 15 bombs in the set. And most of those cards are expensive cards, right? With an aggro deck, even if you got an aggressive red-blue aggro deck, let's say, right? I'm less inclined to play Disdainful Stroke because I'm not expecting the game to go that long, and I need the range in which I see those bombs, or I have a chance to see those bombs, is lessened, right? But when the games are going to go long, they're going to go 10, 12, 13 turns, yeah, Disdainful Stroke's good because you have this catch-all answer to some of the best cards in the format. So yeah, totally agree. And on top of that, the Jaspira Sentinels in this deck play nicely with the Disdainful Stroke because you're going to have additional mana lying around where you can still go, on a later turn of the game, go play a 4-drop, leave up Disdainful Stroke because they have 2 Jaspira Sentinels around. So yeah, totally love it in this style of deck.
Yeah, I think I sent you a screenshot where I had, 3 or 4 Jaspira Sentinels in my opening hand, and then I drew the War Master, and that game was over.
Yeah. And sometimes you just get those quick kills too. Totally.
So the next one is a much better example of what a snow deck I think should look like in this format from my perspective, and I'd love to get your feedback on it.
Yeah. This one's a beauty, by the way.
This one is almost, while I called the last one a control, it still had an aggro package in the elves. This one was basically just raw control. I won most of my games on the back of the Dread Rider, while just keeping them suppressed with the Priest of the Haunted Edge, raise the Draugr to bring back 2 priests, 3 Binding of the Old Gods just to destroy any of their targets. You can see a Draugr Necromancer in there. I actually never got to cast that, or it was in the play and never really did anything. This deck basically just won by drawing the game out and then dropping a Dread Rider and draining them.
Nice. Yeah, I think the thing to point out that I love about this deck is, I wonder if yesterday Nathan would have gone, no, look at all these powerful 4-drops. I'm going to win the game because I have 3 bindings in this Necromancer and this Spirit, and maybe wouldn't have prioritized the Priests of the Haunted Edge as much, where those are just so important to be able to get to those powerful cards. Because, look, if you die before you cast your if you're 2 behind when you cast your 4-drop, that binding's just not going to do that much. But with these priests that go up the ground, yeah, it's going to be fantastic. It's a real nice little 1-2 punch of defensive 2-drop into good 4-drop, and that's what these decks want a lot of the time.
Yeah, and yesterday Nate would not have made this deck. I mean, as we know from our previous lessons, Nathan was probably not in control decks, was not prioritizing 2-drops enough. So this one went the other way. I actually had a 5th one in the sideboard, and fifth priest in the sideboard, and I was like, yeah, I just can't play that.
And I think it would even be reasonable here. I agree, you don't want a million reactive things. And one of the interesting things about this deck is you're actually a hard control deck here, because you're very low on ways to actually win the game. You have a lot of ways to interact and kill their stuff and stay alive, but that Dread Rider is just the weight of the world is on that Dread Rider's shoulders, Yep. That thing is doing a lot of work in this deck, which is funny because that's a card that, is not fantastic. And I think a lot of players probably even at this point would write that card off as unplayable, but that's a good card if you need a way to close the game. I've been in a similar spot where, hey, I can not die very, very well, but I need a way to reliably win the game, or else I'm just gonna eventually die to something, some good draws they have or something like that.
To give kudos where kudos are due, it's partly coaching, but also partly doing my homework. Right. And my homework in this case was watching you do the Sweatpants Invitational.
Oh, the sweatsuit, the 100 pence. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you ultimately had a Dread Rider, and I was like, oh, he's actually doing a lot of work with that Dread Rider. It makes sense in this format.
Yeah, it's actually funny, when I was talking about it, I was actually thinking about that exact deck where, very similar thing. I had a lot of interaction, but I had maybe 1 bomb rare or 2 bomb rares to close the game, but I was just like, you know what, this deck needs one more way to reliably close the game, and look, Dread Rider fits that bill, right? So, like I was just saying, I think I looked at your drafts and your decks this week. You made some real good progress. I was really, really thrilled at the drafts that you did this week, just in your picks and your builds and in your gameplay. Why don't you just give us a little bit of a rundown here of, how this week went?
Yeah, I mean, so when we have it up on the screen here, I did 7 drafts. I got 3 trophies.
Nice.
I had another 2 that were 4 wins and 6 wins. I had a 3-3 draft and only 1 losing draft, and that one you and I talked about offline, but I went 1-3, but 2 of those losses, I was stuck on 3 lands for like 10 turns each,
right?
Despite having 7 lands. So I think, we did a little post analysis of those decks, and the deck wasn't great. It wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't a 1-3 deck. It just kind of got mana screwed. So I felt really great about this week. Obviously, like, huge turnaround from where we were before. 3 trophies in the week is great. I went 35-15 for a 70% win rate, which was tremendous.
Blazing, yeah.
And that actually ended up, so, as of this episode, I have a 60% win rate in the format. Obviously, that'll go down as you move up against tougher opponents. I ended up actually making it to Diamond 4, which is probably the highest I think I've ever made. I don't know that I've gotten much higher than Diamond 4, but eventually we'll get me to Mythic.
Yeah.
But that was a really great week, and I think a lot of the lessons and the heartache from the last couple weeks have manifested into a successful week.
Awesome. Yeah, and just let's put up the large results, the large scale results of your progress, because I think it's really good to show just by the numbers how well you've been doing. Obviously there's going to be variance in Magic and whatnot, but I do think this is meaningful results. I would say, like I said, I'm really proud. I'm really happy with the fact that you getting a diamond is huge, right? That's just like I think that's the big threshold that a lot of players are trying to cross a lot of the time. We're just like, well, I'm stuck in plat. That's the place people get stuck a lot of the time, and getting a diamond, yeah, big congrats. And that's, like you said, a lot of that is just your hard work, I think, and your homework that you did.
And your coaching.
Didn't want to say it, but
well, I mean, part of the reason for this whole show is to demystify coaching. Right?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
And it's a lot of work on your end, and it's a lot of work on my end, and it's the combination of us working together to get there. So.
Yeah. All right, and just to round us out here, you have some takeaways for us.
Yeah, so I wanted to, each of the episodes that we've done have had a lot of feedback. This particular pick or higher level stuff. Obviously, I and our listeners or viewers aren't going to retain everything, but I wanted to just take a step back and highlight some of the lesson learned for me that I'm going to take away from our Kaldheim block and try to take forward into Strixhaven. I'm sure there's going to be new mistakes, or I'll repeat some of these in Strixhaven, or maybe Strixhaven will turn everything on its head and it won't be relevant. But I think it's always good just to do a little recap.
Totally.
So the first one that was one of the very first things that we highlighted, which was check in on your colors. I think a lot of times I get into a draft and you would ask me, like, why are you green here? Or why are you red? And I was like, whoa, well, I have that one good red card or that one good green card, so I'm clearly that. But, after pack 1, is that really, is it worth pivoting? Can you lose all of this or not? And
right.
I think that one was a big step up, because I learned a long time ago, don't get attached to your first couple picks, because those are the least information that you have. You don't know what people are passing. It's very easy to say, like, I opened this bomb, I'm just going to stick to it, but nobody gave that to you.
Right, yeah.
Other than Hasbro, right? but reflecting at the end of the pack was not something that I was doing. And I think that's great. Number 2 for me was... I had to put this number 2 just because we hit it so much, and it makes sense. Check your 2 drops. Make sure you have 2 drops. Yeah. So I don't want to hammer that one too much, but I was good at that in my aggro decks, but all of your decks need 2 drops. You need to impact the board at that point. Foretelling is not impacting the board. You are doing something with your mana, but you are not. It's not like you're foretelling on 2 a card that you're going to cast on 3 that says, just kill 2 of your opponent's creatures. That's just like not a thing.
Yeah.
This one's an easy one. Number 3 is really easy for me. Have your deck list up. I always thought, like, oh, I remember what's in my deck, or I remember my outs or whatnot. A lot of times there's stuff hidden in there that you weren't thinking about, or you forgot that you didn't put it in the deck. And so going back to you can either take a screenshot of it, but going back to how good 17 lands is, it shows your deck in real time. You can just open it on 17 lands and be like, what did I draft? So that's just another check mark for 17 lands.
Yeah, I think, especially if you're if you're if you're like a once a week kind of drafter, where you're just like, well, I remembered what I drafted this week. Of course, I know what's in my deck. You still want that screenshot, because there's your mind can only retain so much information, but especially for those drafters who are, you're in your fourth draft of the night or whatever, you're like, well, did I have 2 squashes in this deck or was that the other deck? So it's like, yeah, it's just like such an easy way to level up your game where it's trivial, right? Especially, you can't do this at your local game store really, but having digital Magic here, and that's what most of us are playing these days, it's just like you're really punishing yourself if you're not taking this one easy step,
Yeah, I mean, also if you take a break, like you finish drafting for the night, you're like, oh, I'm 3-2 or whatever it is, I'll finish this later, and then you come back 2 days later and you're like, what was in this deck? I don't remember.
Totally, yeah. Yeah.
Number 4 was a takeaway from last week, is reduce the board when you don't have removal. I think we saw where I fired off the Demon Bolt too early, and then I let the board compound. And I think, the concept of reducing the board after that was not something I was aware of at all or had thought through. And I actually had an opponent do it to me, and I was like, wow, that was really effective in terms of what they did. But, I haven't had a chance to put that into practice yet, but that was a good takeaway for me in this block.
Awesome.
And then the last 3 are this format specific. Those first 4 are generic, but these 4, I ended up really down on black. I know a lot of people ended up down on black. You've talked about it, but I found that even what I thought were decent black decks, black red or black white, I really struggled to win with. So that's a format specific thing. You have far more experience with this than I do. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think this even comes up today, even in my drafts and in the way Twitch chat wants me to go down a certain route or not, and I think that where I've landed on black is that it's a fine color. You just have to not get baited into it. And you kind of have to, one, have a reason to be in black. Either you open up a good black bomb or the table's like completely ignoring the color. Like you wheel feed the serpent, right? It's not a color that I want to be like, oh, let's take a feed of serpent third and we'll see if it pans out. Because more often than not, it just doesn't pan out. And the key here is that it's not that you can't have a good black deck. It's that it is less likely for you to have a successful black deck than any other color. That's all it comes down to. And I think a lot of people get that confused sometimes where it's like, well, I had a good black deck. I had a 7-1 black deck. I'm not saying that can't happen. 100%, right? It's just that if you're looking for, by the numbers, the most successful routes, if you have to pick between a green card and a black card, you should just take the green card because there's more good green cards and there's better green synergies than there are black synergies. That's the other thing that really hurts black, is its synergies are just weaker than the other colors. And, you said this is format exclusive or format specific, but you can carry that forward to other formats too, right? The way I always put it is, don't be the one to get suckered into a bad color or be bullied into it, right? Like, I think that a lot of times it's like, well, the black's open, so the people are passing the black. I should maybe just take the black. Yes, but you have to be very certain that you're going to get good cards later. Like, it has to be super clear. And I think another thing that people sometimes fall into this trap of is they go, oh, well, everybody thinks black is bad, so I'm going to draft black. I'm going to be the clever drafter, that gets all the good black cards. Well, even if you do get all the black cards at the table, sometimes it's still not good enough. And again, I think you'd probably do well just to go by the numbers of these cards are just better than these cards, or the green cards are just better than the black cards. I think an analog to that for anybody who plays Constructed is, not playing the best deck, right? Where it's like, ooh, I'm not going to play, Teamer Adventures or whatever the best deck in Standard is. I'm going to bring this like tier 2 brew that nobody's expecting. Sure, you might catch people off guard. You might get a little bit of EV there, but just drafting the best cards, playing the best deck, whatever it is, that's going to get you a lot of the way, especially if you're not like a world-class player,
Yeah. But one of the things that you mentioned in that 1-3 deck it was a black-white deck, and your comment was the white cards in this set and the black cards in this set want you to do different things.
Yep.
And they don't really work well together in a set. And yeah, I had not much success with black-white. I had a really good black-red Berserkers deck one time, And every other time I got put into black-red, it was, even with the same somewhat Berserkers card, it just didn't pan out. I mean, maybe there's variance there. I'm taking a very small sample size, but the one black that I did find effective was black-green.
Yeah.
Black-green elves is really solid.
Yep. Agreed. And that's a combination of the synergies being good, like the black-red synergies. There's just not really black-red synergies. There's a few, you can get the Blood Sky Massacre, the rare, or there's a few things here and there, but nowhere near the levels of, there's multiple good elf rares, and there's good elf uncommons, right? But also, just kind of like you were saying before, where the white cards and the black cards don't pair very well together. The white cards want to be aggressive, the black cards want to be grindy, controlling. The green and black cards both kind of want to play a mid-rangey long game, so they just naturally have synergy and cohesion with each other. There's no fighting between the cards, right? So the fact that they just play well together and there is overt synergy make it a deck that I'm pretty happy with. And what third level is that a month into the format, a lot of people still weren't into drafting elves at all. They're just like completely off the deck. So that's a little bit of push in the direction of that deck being even a little bit better than any other black combination.
And then my final point here is not really a point. It's just an observation. In 22 drafts, I never got into Giants. I never had a blue-red deck. And I actually, personally, I like that color combination.
Yeah.
But I never saw, I think I saw one Agar or two, maybe. Never got past it. I never got into it. You see a lot of the ones that are just blue-red Scry 2. I forget what that one's called. But I have zero experience with that. And so that's either a gap on my end. Like maybe I should be getting into Giants and I wasn't. Or the format, I don't know. Maybe it's a gap or maybe I was doing the right thing. But I just wanted to pause here and say, what's your experience with blue-red? Should I have been in it a lot? Or is not getting it into 22 drafts, does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think so. Because if I look at my stats, I was actually saying this earlier today to somebody, I haven't been in Giants in forever. I think it's just a very overdrafted deck. People, Agar is obviously a really powerful card. People want to take that card, right? And they want to build around it. Great, it's a great card. And the blue and red cards, they play reasonably well together. I don't have any qualms with how the blue and red cards played together. But I think, at least for me, and I don't know if this is explicitly or implicitly, subconsciously is what happened for you too, maybe. But I know at the beginning of the format, I was getting Giants a lot. But that was because squashes were coming around late. Squashes don't come around late anymore. People know that card is good. And that's a key card for the deck, right? Your Giants deck with 0 squashes and 3 Agars or 2 Agars is going to be much worse than a Giants deck with 3 squashes. And of course, Demon Bolt is a good analog, but everybody's going to want Demon Bolt, right? So I think, for me at least, the fact that it got some hype early on where people were just like, this is a really good deck, and the fact that one of the key cards doesn't go late anymore is just, those are contributing factors for me not getting to the deck very often. So, and maybe, like you said, for you personally, it might have just been I'm a little bit less comfortable drafting this, or there's lanes I'm more familiar with that I'm going to go down and just not take this Craven Hulk 5th or whatever. It could be a little bit of both, but I do think in general, I think it's been one of the more overdrafted decks as the format's gone on.
Got it. Yeah, so hopefully I can take some of these lessons learned into Strixhaven and we'll see what goes on from there.
Awesome. Yeah, and thank you so much, Nathan. By the way, I just want to say a big thank you for you were the one who reached out to me to start this project. I had such a really great time talking to you on and off this our recording here. You've been a delight. It's been great. I'm so glad that we could do this, and I'm so glad that we're going to be able to keep doing this as well, both for my intrinsic enjoyment, but also to help a good cause, which I think is great. That being said, look forward to Strixhaven. We're going to be one of the things that we did want to improve on, just as a some feedback we got is, this would be really good to start early on because when we started this in call time, it was 3 or 4 weeks into the format where I think a lot of people were kind of settling, understanding the format. But I think what's going to be really cool is with Strixhaven, we're going to get our first video we're planning to get in the first week or two, and you at home can really play along with us, where it's I'm discovering the format as well. We're both going to be discovering the format, and we can kind of do that together and kind of go on that little adventure all together at the same time.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. And before you shift off of that, I've really enjoyed this as well. I've enjoyed working with you. This has been a really tremendous project so far.
I'm so glad to hear it. All right, Nathan, let's wrap up here. Let's sign off. If you would like to give us any feedback, please feel free to leave any comments, any questions. We'll be happy to answer. There's a bunch of links in the description to the Discord if you want to contact me, or my Twitter if you want to contact me there. Nathan, anywhere people can contact you?
Yeah, Nathan at Leveling Up Lives, and I think you throw my Twitter in the body as well, right? So,
yep.
Alex, I'm gonna put a plug in for you here. If people want to, if they want to go through the coaching process, like how do they reach out to find that with you?
Yeah, totally. I didn't mention that, but this is also going to be in the description. But you can just email me. I have an email, cordocoaching@gmail.com. Actually, sorry, cordocoach@gmail.com. Message me there, or honestly, message me anywhere, any platform, and whatever is easiest for you. Contact me. We'll be able to set up something that works best for you, both time-wise and approach-wise. And I'm very much open to anybody, new, old, experienced, beginner, any walk of life, any experience level. I'm there for all of it.
Great.
All right, Nathan. Thanks so much.
Right, thanks.
We'll see you next season.
Yeah, well, Strixhaven is basically like Harry Potter, right?
Yeah, basically. Although
we're going to be going.
Although I think Hasbro doesn't really like you making that comparison, to be honest.
Oh, really?
I don't know. I've heard tale of it.
Well, we'll go back to coaching back in school, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. See you around then. See you out there. See you, everybody.
Bye.